Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're going to continue on in Unit 6, Industrial and Economic Development. Today what we're going to be looking at is this idea of economic globalization. So we've been talking about the idea of the development gap, and obviously the development gap is going to be directly tied in and correlated to this idea of economic globalization. Because what we're looking at is kind of the interconnectedness and the relationship that exists between countries on the global economic scale. And so I really think one of the best ways to look at that graphically is through that idea of the core periphery concept and the idea of the core periphery relationships that are used by the world system analysis. Maybe not necessarily to come to the same conclusions all the time as the world system analysis, but definitely to understand those relationships that exist between countries as it stands right now. But of course, as we continue on in time and as countries begin to develop and grow wealthier, we really don't know what the future relationship will be. Anyway, so what we've seen over the past 20 or so years, and we discussed this very early on in our course, is this idea of the global interconnectedness of business, and through a variety of different ways. And this is one of our very first discussions we had in Unit 1. So looking at in the example of Starbucks, McDonald's, and MTV as global businesses, and they're global businesses in a variety of different ways. Whereas Starbucks, the primary consumers are in the United States, and I'm sure Starbucks, has stores in other parts of the world. But with Starbucks, the situation is where Starbucks brings together raw materials from all over the world, and that's that graphic we looked at in Unit 1, from all over the world, and then sells products, sells coffee in more developed countries for the most part. And so it's global in that sense, that it brings the raw materials in from those periphery countries, in some cases like the wood from Norway and Sweden, the paper products. But anyway, so it brings in those raw materials and interacts with countries in those ways. McDonald's, has a global model of business where it sells goods and it sells food to people all over the world, and so people are interacting with McDonald's in that way. And of course, McDonald's is changing itself up based on the specific culture and the people that it's interacting with. And most of its food supply chain is going to be relatively local because of the way that it's going to try and cater to the local population. MTV takes American culture and sells it all over the world, so it's going to be interacting with people in that way. And so again, you have three different companies, all global, but global in different kinds of ways. And so what we're seeing over time is the increase in what are called multinational or transnational corporations. So basically, all the multinational or transnational corporation is a company that has its headquarters. Typically, the headquarters is located in a more developed country, whereas the production facilities exist in the less developed country in order to take advantage of cheaper labor, lower taxes, fewer environmental regulations, those types of things. Now, the problem that a lot of people have with this particular model is because where a lot of the money is made and where the better paying jobs are at is within the headquarters. And so people feel like these multinational and transnational corporations are taking advantage of people in less developed countries, and if they really actually cared about the people in less developed countries and improving the economy and those types of things, then they would bring the headquarters to that country where they could offer some of those jobs, especially within the headquarters itself. Maybe not some of the upper level decision-making jobs, but maybe some of the management positions or lower level staff positions to the people within that particular country. And again, that's just another way that people talk about the way that more developed countries are using less developed countries in a negative way. So another thing that's come up as a part of economic globalization is this idea of outsourcing. So very similar to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, where these transnational corporations look at the substitution principle and begin to be willing to take on higher transportation costs in exchange for lower labor costs. And so again, this is primarily the moving of production facilities. And probably about 10 years ago, the word outsourcing, especially in the United States, was almost a dirty word because it was happening in several parts of the country, and it was causing a lot of people to become very upset because obviously people were losing their jobs. Where I did my student teaching at in South Carolina, A lot of people had been impacted by the outsourcing of the textile mills, and so that was a real point of contention when I happened to be going through college at that particular time. There's actually a town that a friend of mine lived in. It's called Calhoun Falls, and pretty much Calhoun Falls, South Carolina, is pretty much a ghost town because the textile mill in that town shut down. And so of course the people that had the jobs there had to leave and go find work elsewhere. But of course it is beneficial to the people where the outsourcing production or the outsourcing happens, because we're talking about the supplying of jobs to people in those countries. Now, people who are not real thrilled about the way that more developed countries do this might say that these transnational corporations again are taking advantage of low-level wages. They're taking advantage of child labor laws in foreign countries. They're taking advantage of fewer environmental regulations, and so there's a lot of criticism that's heaped on these companies for doing this. But again, that's just kind of the situation we have. And again, they move for many reasons, and I have a couple here. Obviously things like lower taxes, lower wages, cheaper land, and when it says environment, what we're talking about here is typically in these less developed countries, there are fewer environmental regulations that the companies have to deal with, whether it's taxes that they have to pay or whether it's actual protocols that they have to follow, and so it causes production to be cheaper. When production is cheaper, profit margins can go up because they're able to save money on the production end. Another thing we're beginning to see is what's called foreign direct investment. Okay, and so foreign direct investment is when foreign companies go in and they invest in the infrastructure of less developed countries. And so they do this through a couple of different ways, and these are pretty much the same idea, this idea of the special economic zone or the export processing zone. So with these foreign direct investments, what happens is within these special economic zones, less developed countries, specifically places like China, there's a great documentary called Life and Debt on the country of Jamaica, and this highlights some of the issues of special economic zones. So the special economic zone is set up specifically for foreign companies to come in and set up their businesses, and they're called special economic zones because they are insulated from the typical government regulations that exist on business in the country. And so it's an incentive to get some of these more developed the companies from these more developed countries to come into this country to provide jobs. Not unlike when a state might offer a tax break or something like that to a company when they will come to a particular state. Georgia, I can think of Mercedes has just decided to move their headquarters to the state of Georgia, and the state of Georgia offers them various tax breaks and things like that. But not typically, one thing that's not going to happen are things like regulations on labor and pay and things like that are not going to be suspended, whereas that might happen in special economic zones. Export processing zones would be a type of special economic zones. So it's a similar situation where these companies come in, they set up facilities specifically to provide provide jobs for people in less developed countries with lower labor restrictions, lower taxes, things like that. They're also called free trade zones, and so these are going to be zones that are set up that are going to have goods exported with little to no duties or tariffs on the goods that are being exported. And in these situations, special economic zones or export processing zones, a lot of times these are set up so that the goods, like not necessarily the finished product, but when you have, let's say, cloth goods, so cotton is woven into fabric, and then the fabric is sent to the export processing zone to be finished. So that's what I should say. A lot of finishing goes on in special economic zones and export processing zones. And again, it's set up specifically just to try and provide jobs. Now again, people are critical of special economic zones and export processing zones because of the way that they say it takes advantage of local labor force, the types of practices that businesses will use in dealing with these people. I think, again, if you go watch the documentary Life and Debt, you see a good illustration of that in Jamaica, and you can kind of get an idea for what problem people have with these types of situations. An example of this specifically is what's called the Maquiladora or the Maquiladora zones. The Maquiladora zones were set up as an agreement between the United States and Mexico, specifically to try and provide jobs for poor farmers in Mexico who are having a hard time, hard time making a living, and we're just having a hard time in general. And so they're situated along the northern border of the United States and Mexico, and so they are a type of export processing zone. So what happens is a product that is close to being finished, blue jeans or undergarments or T-shirts or whatever, are sent to the Maquiladora zone to be finished, and then they're packaged again and they're sent back into the United States. And so, this provides cheaper labor for American companies. It provides jobs for people in Mexico. So, it's beneficial in that way. But there are people do very similar criticisms to the Maquiladora zones as you've seen in others. You have situations where the companies, the people feel like they're being taken advantage of, not being paid well enough. The conditions of the work maybe aren't so great. People having to stand for long hours during the day. A lot of situations you find here, especially, are that women are being hired over men, and so that creates some social issues because the men aren't able to find work. So that creates tension within society and with the home, and there's been violence carried out towards women in Mexico as a result. Also, in these Maquiladora zones, things tend to become very crowded. It becomes highly polluted, and so there are issues along those lines as well. But anyway, so you can see kind of the back and forth between the movement of industry into less developed countries, but then some of the issues that come as a result. So anyway, that's all that we have time for today. I hope that you found that to be helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment box below, and I hope to see you next time.